In New Zealand, under a blood-orange sky, the last fingers of sunlight claw through the thick, misty air above the Bay of Plenty. Around the Coromandel Peninsula, low clouds drift like tired ghosts. The land hisses where it meets the sea, geothermal vents bubbling, steam rising in lazy exhalations. You stand there, barefoot on warm volcanic sand, while thunder murmurs in the distance like a sleeping god. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan, and listen to some soothing music, and we'll get started tonight. You hear it before you see it. Low, guttural, ancient, a growl, deep beneath your feet. The earth trembles slightly, like a restless creature. You're not in New Zealand anymore. You've slipped, somewhere backward, millions, maybe billions of years back. The air is heavy. The sky hangs low and yellow. The oceans are young, wild, and greedy, stretching out like molten silver beneath a sun far too close. The clouds above swirl like spilled ink in boiling soup. You are in the furnace where hurricanes were born. They weren't called that back then, of course. No one had yet dared to name them. No one had lips to speak or fingers to write. But the winds knew themselves. They knew their strength. And they knew the world would one day listen. It started as breath, hot, damp, erratic, a vapor rising from newborn seas that had no tide, no coral, no fish, no song. And then that vapor met the cold sighs from the polar reaches, clashing not like enemies, but like dancers with wildly different rhythms. The dance turned into a spiral. You stand near the equator, though you wouldn't call it that yet, and you watch the air spin, pulled into a great circle by something you cannot see. The Coriolis force hasn't been named, but its fingers are twisting clouds into the world's first cyclone. Rain falls, not droplets, but spears. Lightning rips the sky, not in jagged forks, but in curtains of electric fire. And beneath that fire, Earth listens. Earth learns. Earth begins writing in wind. The continents were still unsure of themselves then. They moved like children in a game, bumping into one another, drifting apart, testing their boundaries. Each collision belched magma. Each separation opened a scar of water, new and uncertain. And it was here, in the steam and chaos, that the storm found its first brush. It carved valleys where none existed. It sculpted deltas with sediments gathered from broken coastlines. It peeled rivers out of dry land, engraving the first veins into Earth's skin. Have you ever heard of this hardy plant, stromatolite? It wouldn't impress you now. It's just a crusty little dome in shallow water. But that boring little bump was one of the first to photosynthesize. Oxygen, color, breath. And it grew best after storms stirred the soup, lifting nutrients from the seabed, shaking everything alive. The storm wasn't just screaming, it was stirring the bowl. Here's a secret. Storms remember, not in words, in temperature, in pressure, in rhythm. Each hurricane is a reader of ocean skin, scanning for warmth, for imbalance, for places where the world forgets equilibrium. And so, even in the Precambrian haze, storms developed a memory for heat, a hunger for the margins. They chased the equator's warmth, feeding, spinning, growing, The same way wolves test fences, these early cyclones tested the boundaries of life. One day, they lifted iron particles from deep water, feeding the first blooms of microbial colonies. Another day, they scoured coastlines, opening tide pools that concentrated amino acids like thick soup. Then came lightning, striking the pool, again and again, until something twitched. That twitch, that first accidental zipper of molecules, life's first heartbeat. Maybe, because how must storms have shaped life, if not by force feeding it possibilities? Time passes, the way wind passes, silently, constantly. You blink and now Earth has forests, strange, stalky ferns as tall as houses, giant insects buzz through the dense air, amphibians crawl from the water. Curious, the air is thicker, richer, as though the planet finally took a full breath. But the hurricanes, oh, they haven't left. They've only become more elegant, faster, hungrier. They become seasonal visitors now, sweeping through these forests not to destroy, but to edit. A tree with shallow roots? Gone. A creature that can't burrow deep? Swept away. A fish that can sense changes in water pressure before a storm hits? That one survives. And it passes down that instinct, generation by generation, storm by storm. The hurricanes become sculptors. And what is evolution, really, but a slow acknowledgement of pressure? Let's not get sentimental here. Storms don't care, but they are surprisingly consistent in their chaos. They break so that new things can grow. They flood inland lakes that become permanent. They uproot forests that open sunlight for new species. They collapse cliffs that form tide pools, each a laboratory for mutation. And in those chaotic cradles, the weird things thrive: lungfish, slime molds, early proto-mammals. Storms don't reward strength, they reward preparation, or hiding, or flexibility, the bendy, the adaptable. Even before words, you can imagine it. A creature, something early, cautious, listening to the distant roar of thunder and choosing to stay hidden. That's not logic. That's the embryo of fear, of intuition, of myth. One day, that fear will become a story. And what is a myth but a memory, passed down with emotion? The early humans, still hunched and wide-eyed, will one day explain the lightning as a god. They'll offer songs, dances. They'll build huts that face away from the wind. But all of that began here with you, watching the very first hurricane eat the horizon and redraw the map. You open your eyes. It's raining again. Present day. Or almost. The sea has a language now. It's written in tide charts and choral patterns. The storm still whispers. But we wear headphones now. Still, some things haven't changed. That whisper? It's the same one that fed the stromatolites, that carved the coastline, that taught the tree frog when to leap. And if you close your eyes and really listen, you might still hear it, not as fear, not as warning, but as memory. Because hurricanes weren't just born from the earth, they helped give Earth a heartbeat. You wake to bird song, the kind that's shy, half-formed, an echo of trill and whistle drifting through heavy mist in the mangroves. The air smells of salt and rot, rich with decay, rich with life. You sit under a canopy where the trees walk on stilts, roots like spider legs, sipping from brackish water that rises and falls with a rhythm older than the moon. Somewhere nearby, a heron lifts slowly into the air, its wings slicing the wet silence. Behind it, the sky begins to turn. Blue becomes gray. Stillness thickens. You don't need a weather report. You already know. A storm is coming. But tonight, we're not talking about destruction. Not really. Because what if, instead of thinking of hurricanes as nature's tantrums, you imagined them as architects, engineers of life? Because that's exactly what they are. You trudge carefully through ankle-deep water. Beneath you, crabs scurry. Above, everything listens. Mangroves aren't just trees. They're survivors with a blueprint burned into every salt-filtering root. Why are they shaped that way? Why do their seeds drop straight down like living darts? Because hurricanes taught them, after each massive storm, the landscape is scraped raw. Most trees fall, but not these. They bow, they bend, they grip the mud like desperate fingers. And after the wind moves on, they're the first to bloom again. Their roots catch sediment. They build new land, literally. You watch it happen in time-lapse. Storms churn mud. Mangroves trap it. Coastlines creep forward, year by year. Life expanding not in leaps, but in shuffles. How must storms have changed the fate of humanity? Maybe by laying the groundwork for where we could even walk. You breathe the air, thick with methane and memory, and realize these trees are the storm's apprentices. Now, take a few steps inland. You're in a forest post-cyclone. Not the howling moment of impact, but the day after. Sunlight filters through a canopy that used to be whole. Branches scatter the ground. Entire clearings gape open like wounds. But look closer. There's a fern already uncurling, insects stirring in damp leaves, frogs chirping in puddles that didn't exist yesterday. This isn't death. This is renewal with urgency. You crouch beside a tiny frog. It's barely the size of your fingernail, and it's green as envy. This frog is different from the one 5 miles downriver. Why? Because during the last major storm, the river split. New barriers, new pools, populations trapped and cut off. Evolution begins, not in silence, but in wind. Hurricanes are the editors of the genome. They don't write life, but they certainly cross things out. The small, the adaptable, the quiet. They inherit the earth after every flood. You don't think of yourself as shaped by storms, but you are. Long before weather apps and satellite warnings, your ancestors watched the sky, a certain shape of cloud, a certain hush in the afternoon. The body remembered even when the mind forgot. You look up now. Do you feel your skin shift when the pressure drops? That's not imagination. That's biology. That's inheritance. You carry the emotional memory of every ancestor who ran from a rising tide. Whole populations migrated to higher ground, not because they liked the view, but because they remembered the sea could be cruel. How must storms have shaped life? By stirring up not only genes, but emotions. You pause at a hilltop, watching the wind flatten the grass, and you realize some part of you is always listening for thunder. Let's talk about a place, a story you might have missed. Honduras, 1998, Hurricane Mitch. It rained for 6 days straight. Landslides buried entire towns. Rivers ran backward. An entire village moved 3 miles without asking permission. And afterward, maps were useless. Roads were rivers. What was once farmland became swamp. But people didn't leave. They adapted. They rebuilt, not in the same way, but with memory in their hands. Homes lifted on stilts. Fields planted further uphill. Even the government redrew its zoning laws based on where the storm had drawn its scars. Storms don't follow borders, but they create them. That's how they become architects, not by design, but by deletion. You see, we don't just learn from storms, we are redesigned by them. Beneath the sea, it is quiet. But after a hurricane passes overhead, the ocean is a stirred pot. Cold water from the depths, warm water from the top, mixing like cream into coffee. And coral reefs, they love that. Bleached coral, a tragedy. Sure, but sometimes storms come just in time to cool overheating seas. They save the reef, a reset button, a mercy punch. You dive down, hands drifting over soft polyps. You watch fish dart in and out of caverns newly formed by broken reef. Destruction, yes, but not without purpose. Storms don't spare the reef, but they make it stronger. They trim the dead, open space for the new, and again, only the adaptable survive. A lesson repeated in rain, in wind, in water. You return to the mangroves. They're taller now, a new generation, but the roots look the same, spindly, stubborn, braced for the wind. You sit in silence as rain begins to fall again. It doesn't feel threatening now. It feels like design, like ritual, like the pulse of something far older than you. The spiral moves, always, from ocean to land, from tree to gene, from myth to memory. And you are one small piece in its eternal architecture. You arrive under a full moon, barefoot on the wet edge of a barrier island off the Carolina coast. The tide sighs in and out, gentle as breath, brushing against bleached driftwood curled like sleeping dragons. Somewhere inland, a cricket chorus hums, and beyond that, only stillness. But something in the air tells you it won't last, because the sea is gathering itself again, slowly, quietly, as it always has. And you've come at just the right time to witness a storm, not as a killer, not as a wrathful god, but as a gardener, as an artist, as something that cultivates, seeds, builds. Tonight, the storm is planting. It begins at night. You sit beside a dune and wait. The air thickens. The tide begins to sneak past its usual line. Then, without fireworks, without thunder, a wall of seawater begins to slide onto land. Storm surge, 2 words that usually mean destruction. But look again. That surge doesn't just drown things, it delivers seeds, larvae, sand, driftwood, nutrients from the deep ocean. The marsh grasses drink in salt and sediment, The baby fish ride in like passengers on a ghost ship. The land rises, imperceptibly, but it rises. Without storm surge, many islands would sink. Without hurricanes, they would starve. So the storm gives, not every time, not gently, but regularly. And in the rhythm of that giving, entire ecosystems bloom. You wake on Andros Island in the Bahamas. The wind has flattened half the palms, but the other half stand, defiant, with roots that go deeper than the trees are tall. A botanist once called hurricanes island sculptors. You can see why. After every major storm, the landscape changes. Trees gone. The sun hits soil now. Dormant seeds awaken. New species appear. Cuban parrots, once rare, thrive in hurricane-cleared forests. Why? Because their nesting trees were buried under vines. The storm unwrapped them. You think it's an accident, but it's not. Evolution, nudged by wind. The storm doesn't choose the winners, but it clears the ring. Let's dive beneath. A satellite image after a cyclone shows green ribbons blooming in the blue sea, plankton explosions. Why? Because hurricanes churn the water column, like a hand stirring a pot of stew. Nutrients trapped in the deep come surging upward. Tiny creatures feast, larger ones follow. Fish, whales, you're watching a feast you can't see, but it's feeding half the ocean. Storms fertilize oceans the way rain feeds soil. The difference? Nobody talks about it. But right now, you float just beneath the surface, surrounded by invisible abundance. And if you listen closely, the plankton hum. It's 3 a.m., and the reef is glowing, literally. Some corals bioluminesce in the dark. Others just pulse slowly, like breathing stones. Last year, this reef almost died. Heat stress, bleaching. But then the hurricane came. It didn't spare everything. Some coral broke. But the water cooled, the stress lifted, algae washed away. And now, new polyps settle in broken places. Fish weave through new holes. Life begins again, not in spite of the storm, but because of it. Storms can be cruel, but they can also be timely. When oceans forget how to rest, storms remind them. You walk through a city, let's say New Orleans, or Manila, or Dhaka. These places know storms like old lovers, familiar, sometimes violent, sometimes generous. Look at how the buildings change after each storm, higher, tighter, smarter. You pass a house built after Katrina, stilts, storm shutters, solar panels. It's a fortress now. It listens to the wind. Urban planners call this resilient architecture, but really, it's mimicry. We copy mangroves. We elevate like crabs. We build walls like reefs. The city learns, slowly, painfully, but it learns, and every lesson came with rain. The storm passes. You stand in its wake, ankle deep in mud, eyes scanning a landscape you swear you knew. But it's different now. There's a stream where there wasn't, a sandbar newly formed. You spot birds nesting in a tree that didn't exist last week. And maybe, just maybe, you feel something stir in your chest. Something not quite grief, not quite relief, something closer to awe. Because this was never about destruction. This was always a garden. One that grows under the spiral touch of wind and water. And the next time someone says, "That storm ruined everything," you'll remember the seeds riding in the surge, the fish gathering in new coves, the coral catching breath, and you'll know better. The storm doesn't ruin, it rearranges. You are not in any country right now. You're in a place between. The wind carries no passport. It murmurs above rice paddies in Luzon, rustles through banana groves in Haiti, slips across the marshes of Florida with the same sigh. This voice, it doesn't care what language you speak. It speaks memory. Tonight, it will take you somewhere quieter, but deeper. Because not all storms leave footprints. Some carve stories, and some of those stories live in you. Close your eyes. You are in Japan. Centuries ago, the clouds have darkened, and the villagers carry lanterns. Children run inside. Old women tie sacred ropes on gates. Why? Because the kami are coming. In Shinto belief, typhoons are gods, both destroyers and purifiers. Wind is not chaos, it is cleansing. In the Philippines, the Amihan and Habagat, the northeast and southwest monsoons, are more than meteorology. They're characters. They argue. They shape lives. And in West Africa, thunder is Shango. He doesn't just shout, he judges. Do you still think storms are just physics? Or are they reminders that not everything that knocks you down is meaningless? Because how must storms have shaped spirit if they were once gods? Haiti, 2008. A series of storms, Faye, Gustav, Hannah, Ike, slammed the island in 1 month. Homes gone, crops drowned, lives undone. But here's something you didn't see on the news. In a mountain village, a Vodou priest holds a ceremony in a ruined temple. He calls the spirits not for revenge, but for guidance. The people rebuild, not as before, but with song, with memory. And every year since, when the wind first changes direction, they sing again. Because that's what storms do to culture. They don't erase it. They crystallize it. They become chapters, psalms. Sometimes they become names whispered before sleep. You're walking through Oklahoma, tornado country, but we're not talking hurricanes anymore. We're talking about how wind learned to speak. Have you ever noticed how people here react to wind? That eerie silence? That look up at the clouds? It's cultural instinct, passed through generations. Not science, not logic, just a feeling. That feeling has saved lives. A grandmother sees a certain cloud curl, gathers her grandkids, and gets in the tub. 5 minutes later, the sirens blare. She didn't need the sirens, she already knew. Storms don't just shape land, they shape how people listen. Let's return to a cyclone's eye, not the chaos, but the silence inside. Ancient Hawaiians believed that eye was the breath of the god Lono, creator of peace and agriculture. Others saw the eye as a test. If you step outside during that false calm, you tempt fate. Even now, people tell stories of the eye that watches, that judges. A sailor claims to have seen visions there, his dead father waving from the waves. A woman once said her labor pains stopped in the eye, as if the storm paused to let life begin. You laugh, you shrug, but in that pause, who's to say what isn't real? Storms hold more than rain, they hold questions. Back in the present, you sit by the window. The wind brushes the curtains. You feel something stir. Maybe it's dread, or maybe it's memory. Not your memory, exactly, but something older, something buried in your DNA. Your great-grandfather once ran from a flood. Your ancestor prayed to a cloud god. Someone before you stood on a hill, smelled the wind, and chose a new path. And that instinct never left. It whispers now, when the air gets thick. It tells you when to close the shutters, or when to simply pause and breathe. That whisper, that's the storm still speaking, not with thunder anymore, with intuition. You walk outside after the storm. The trees are heavy with rain, dripping like they've just cried. The road is slick. The world is quiet. Not the fearful quiet, the reverent one. You pick up a branch, smell the salt. You hear a bird, just one, testing its voice again. Everything looks the same, but it's not quite. Storms never leave things exactly as they were. That includes you. And as you walk back inside, you glance once over your shoulder at the sky, at the wind, not with fear, but with respect, because now you understand the storm never really ends. It only changes shape.